The boardroom on the 40th floor of Carter Dynamics was as silent as an abandoned cathedral, the only sound the soft hiss of the air conditioner threading through thick glass that reflected Seattle's lead gray morning sky. Cold light slid across the walnut table, casting a thin sheen over the tense faces seated around it. Ethan Carter stood alone at the head of the table, his back straight, his shoulders open, his expression carved into stillness. But his eyes, a deep, restrained brown, burned from the inside out. In his hand was a signed document, a single stroke, cutting through a partnership worth $30 million. No one knew what would come next. They only felt something break, sharp and unmistakable, the air pulling tight as if bracing itself. Ethan tightened his grip on the paper, the soft crumple slicing through the room like a blade. Then he spoke. His voice was unusually calm, each word weighted metallic, striking the table with finality. Northstar Airways removed me from my first-class seat yesterday. Ethan began his gaze sweeping across stunned faces, not because of a mistake, not because of a glitch, but because of what they saw. He paused. Silence opened wide. Because I am black. Someone at the far end of the table drew a sharp breath. A chair scraped a dry sound, snapping through the tension. Ethan did not turn. He did not need to. He was familiar with reactions like that. And today, he continued his voice, dropping low and cutting clean. I am terminating all partnership between Carter Dynamics and Northstar Airways. A contract worth $30 million, effective immediately. Not a single breath dared interrupt him. Everyone could see his composure, but none could see the storm compressed beneath it, years of restraint, of endurance, of walking carefully through rooms where he always had to prove he belonged. A pen fell from somewhere to his right, the sharp clack cracking the room like fractured glass. The person scrambled to pick it up, their hand shaking so badly the pen slipped twice. Ethan looked down at the document, as if studying an unstitched wound. "You want to know why I am doing this?" he asked, lifting his gaze, slowly meeting each pair of eyes. Let me start from the beginning. The imaginary camera pulled back, revealing the elegant boardroom and the powerful individuals being drawn unwillingly into a story they never expected to hear. Outside, wind battered the glass as if trying to tear the facade from the city. Seattle looked weary, blurred, soaked in the weight of rain, mirroring Ethan's state the night before. He remembered clearly the moment things began to collapse, the moment politeness snapped, the moment the last thread of trust he held for a system that had always treated him as temporary finally broke. Yesterday, Ethan said, slowly peeling back the memory, as if it were still alive, I boarded the flight at 8:10 to San Francisco. First class, seat 2A. My name was printed right there on the manifest. He stopped. A flash of memory hit warm yellow cabin lights, heavy suitcases rolling past polished shoes of business travelers, stepping around him as if he were invisible. Ethan's hand tightened on the back of the chair beside him, his knuckles pale. But when I sat down, he whispered, they did not see a chief executive officer. They did not see a partner bringing them yearly revenue. They only saw a black man in a seat they believed he did not deserve. A few heads lowered not from guilt, but from the uncomfortable truth they recognized far too easily. Ethan stepped away from his chair and walked slowly around the table as if guiding them through the scene. The camera followed from a low angle, capturing each heavy step. The flight attendant Sarah Thompson asked for my boarding pass. The first time, the second time, the third time. Ethan's voice did not change, but his eyes darkened. No one else was checked. Only me. A young woman near the corner swallowed hard, guilt blooming across her expression. Ethan continued his gaze sharp, and then William Preston walked in. The room shifted, as if a cold draft skimmed through it. A familiar name, a rival, someone who waited for Ethan to slip. Preston arrived late, very late, but they claimed there was a system error. That seat 2A wasn't mine, that I needed to move to economy. A whispered, "Oh God," cracked out from somewhere. Ethan either did not hear or chose not to. He went on his words, dropping like stones. Preston sat in my seat, and Sarah, still smiling, offered to call security if I caused a disturbance. The room froze under the weight of it. Ethan exhaled slow and controlled a breath forged from years of swallowing moments like these. A burst of white light cut through the window as the sun broke through the clouds, illuminating Ethan's face, sharpening every line, giving him the presence of a commander emerging from wreckage. I moved to economy. Ethan said, his voice firm, not because I accepted it, but because I had a deal to protect. The camera eased in on his face, the fire replaced by steel, but I could not protect it. He turned back to the board, bracing one hand on the table, leaning forward slightly. Because Preston spent 3 hours in that first-class seat, my seat listening to every confidential detail about our merger with Apex Systems. The room erupted in silent shock, eyes widened, breaths caught, a twist sharp enough to cut. The man they tried to diminish was the one holding power. North Star Airways. Ethan said enabled our competitor to steal a multi-billion-dollar strategy. He stopped. So did the air. So did the world inside that room. He scanned the faces executives, trying and failing to mask fury, disbelief, helplessness, or a shame none dared name. Then Ethan spoke the words no one expected. I have stayed silent for years. I have convinced myself that if I worked hard enough, I would be treated fairly. But yesterday he paused his hand, curling into a fist. Yesterday they reminded me that in the eyes of some, I am still just a black man sitting in the wrong seat. Someone near the door released a long, shaking breath. Ethan lifted his head. But they also forgot one thing. He straightened, fully power radiating without force or volume. I am Ethan Carter. His voice dropped firm and commanding. And I am the one who decides which companies rise and which ones fall. He placed the cancellation document in the center of the table. The heavy thud echoed like a gavel. North Star Airways wanted to push me down to economy. Ethan lifted his gaze to the security camera on the wall, as if meeting the eyes of millions watching his story unfold. Then I will bring them down from the sky. Wind slammed against the glass, the blinds trembling like drums announcing a coming war. No one breathed deeply. No one looked away from Ethan, because they knew this moment was the beginning of an earthquake greater than anything they had imagined. And Ethan Carter, the man they watched being publicly humiliated, was preparing to strike back. Not with words, not with anger, but with power. The Detroit wind always blew differently, sharp and rough, as if reminding every child born there that the world was not built to welcome them. And in that moment, many years before, Ethan Carter would stand tall in a boardroom on the 40th floor. That same wind pushed through the cracks of a worn apartment on Runyon Avenue. The opening scene unfolded like a film noir frame, a dim yellow bulb hanging loosely, an old dining table with scratched wood, a young black boy about 8 years old, sitting quietly, his feet swinging above the floor. Ethan Carter back then, only little. Ethan did not cry, did not ask, did not tremble. He simply watched, In front of him sat his mother, Linda Carter, her face exhausted, her hands braced against the table, her eyes red from crying too long. Outside the door, the footsteps of police officers echoed, then disappeared as the car carrying his father left the block. Marcus Carter. His father had been taken away in handcuffs for an offense Ethan would later learn was the kind of mistake for which many white men received only a warning. But for people like Marcus, things always played out differently. The camera moved closer to Ethan's face. He did not understand what was happening, but something inside him cracked a belief that justice always stood with good people. Linda sat beside him, her trembling hand resting on his shoulder. "Ethan, you have to be strong. Do you hear me?" Her voice was thin and cold, like the wind slipping under the door. The boy nodded, unblinking. Linda tried to smile, but the corner of her mouth quivered. "Your father." She swallowed hard. "He wants you to study well. He wants you to get out of here." A long silence followed. Then the scene shifted. Wind battered the sign above the laundromat where Linda worked, night snow drifting softly. She hauled heavy bags of wet clothes, her breath rising in pale clouds. The camera panned to the other side of the street. Ethan, now about 12, waited for his mother to finish work. He wore a thin jacket, holding a thick math book, eyes fixed on each line under the dim street lamp. The door creaked open. Linda stepped out, so tired her shoulders seemed ready to collapse. But when she saw her son, she smiled, perhaps the last beautiful smile she had left in those years. "It is freezing. How long have you been sitting here? I was just doing homework, Mum. There is no light inside for you to study. You work 3 jobs. I do not want to bother you." Linda stopped. Her eyes shimmered, not from joy, but from pride, tangled with heartbreak. The camera zoomed in as she cupped her son's cheek, a gentle stroke, an apology she could not voice. The next morning came. The apartment was still dim, but the sound of a pencil scratching across paper filled the room. Ethan, now 14, worked over his exercises. The table was stained with old coffee rings, the desk lamp faint, yet he did not seem to notice. Linda returned from her night shift and set down the cheapest bag of bread. "You have not slept. Not yet. I am almost done with this problem." She sat across from him, watching him with eyes full of fear and hope. Fear that life would crush him, as it had crushed so many others. Hope that if anyone could escape the darkness Detroit laid before its children, it was Ethan. "You will get out of here, Ethan," she whispered. "I know," he said, without looking up. "But I am not leaving without you." The camera caught the soft light falling over Linda's smile, a small, fragile smile, beautiful enough to save an entire day. Time moved on. Ethan entered high school, taller, quieter, more determined. In the halls, he endured taunts from white classmates. "Hey, genius," from the slums. "Do not touch his stuff, you might get in trouble." Laughter echoed. Ethan did not react, not because he was weak, but because he had learned something his father once said. "You do not need to win a small fight when you are meant to win the whole war." The camera followed Ethan as he walked through the hall across the courtyard, into the library where he built a world of his own, a world of logic and science and numbers that did not care about skin color. He read everything, calculus, linear, algebra, programming. Each page opened a door leading him out of Detroit. Then one winter night when he was 17, Linda opened his bedroom door. "Ethan," her voice shook, "you have a letter." The camera dropped lower, catching the tension in Ethan's chest. He rose, slowly walked to the table, his hands trembling as he tore open the envelope. Massachusetts Institute of Technology. The world seemed to fall silent. Ethan read the words, each one hitting him like a heartbeat. "We are pleased to inform you." He stood still. His face stayed neutral, but his eyes glistened. Linda covered her mouth and cried. Ethan held her. Mother and son clung to each other in the small, dark room, but the light in their eyes outshone every street lamp in Detroit. Then a montage unfolded. Ethan leaving home with an old suitcase, Linda crying at the doorway. Ethan on a night bus, watching Detroit fade into the distance, MIT rising like another world made of glass and steel and light. Ethan stepping into a classroom of mostly white students, their curious stares trailing behind him. The pace slowed. Ethan sat alone in his dorm, the white walls so unfamiliar they felt hollow. He closed his eyes. A long breath. "I am not turning back, Mom." MIT was a forge of intellect, and Ethan was a piece of cold steel thrown into the fire. Handheld camera shots captured him studying until 3 in the morning, working 2 part-time jobs in the library, and the computer lab solving problems on crumpled paper, falling asleep on his desk. Between moments of sleep came fragmented dreams, his father behind prison glass whispering, "Do not become me, Ethan." Rise above it, his mother, standing under the yellow bulb, smiling with tearful eyes. He always woke with a new purpose and a heart tougher than before. 4 years later, the camera opened to snowy Boston. Ethan stepped out of MIT's gates with his degree in hand, sunlight catching his eyes. But the world beyond did not greet him the way people imagine. The scene shifted. Ethan in one tech interview after another, his shirt crisp, his tie straight, his eyes sharp. But the recruiters all looked the same, calculating eyes, polite smiles, limp handshakes, followed by the familiar line, "We will be in touch soon." Then his inbox filled with rejections. His white classmates collected job offers from major corporations. Ethan had a shabby rented room, an old laptop, and 2 exhausted hands. Still, he did not quit. There was no one left to prove anything to, except himself. He began writing the first lines of code for what would change his life, an artificial intelligence platform that optimized supply chains, the seed of what would become Carter Dynamics. The camera tightened on his hands, flying over the keyboard fast and precise. Outside, Boston was frozen ice clinging to the window, but inside, Ethan was building fire. He lived off instant noodles for weeks, slept on a worn mattress in the corner, worked until his fingers blistered. There was no one to pull him up when he was tired, no one to tell him he could do it. He had to tell himself. And then one night, the blue light from his screen illuminated his gaunt face as he watched his code run smoothly, no errors. His platform worked. A small smile appeared on Ethan's face, brief and rare, but it was the sign that everything was about to change. Carter Dynamics was born in that freezing little room. The camera snapped back to the present, Ethan in the Carter Dynamics boardroom, his gaze sharp, his breath steady. The voiceover slowed, deepened, waited. "You ask why I could not ignore what happened with the first-class seat." Ethan looked directly at the board. "Because my whole life I have fought for seats that others were handed for free." No one answered. He lifted his chin, his gaze cutting through the room like a blade through cloud. "I rose from Detroit with nothing but 2 hands, and every door slammed in my face. I know exactly what it feels like to be told you do not belong." His voice softened heavy with truth. But North Star Airways, they forgot something. Ethan stood tall, ready for another war. "I am not that boy in Detroit anymore." The camera moved close to his eyes, hardened like steel. I am the one who decides who gets to rise and who is forced to fall. In that moment, even the light in the room seemed to shift, and everyone understood. This was no longer about a seat. It was about a life, and that life had just begun to fight back. The Seattle sky that morning carried a strange shade of gray, not the gray of rain, but a thick ash-like gray, as if the entire sky was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. The camera widened from above the highway, leading into CI Airport, jammed with cars, crowds rushing into the terminal, as if everyone had a life about to change direction. In the midst of that chaos, a glossy black sedan slipped to a stop at North Star Airways' premium departure entrance. The door opened. Ethan Carter stepped out. His navy-tailored suit framed his tall, lean, quietly powerful build. A pale gray tie, polished black leather shoes, a simple yet expensive silver watch. He looked like a man who had reached the kind of success no one in old Detroit could have dared to imagine. But today, his eyes were different. Not the eyes of a confident chief executive officer. Not the eyes of a man preparing to finalize a multi-billion-dollar merger. They were the eyes of someone trying to convince himself that everything would be fine. "Are you sure about this?" Jasmine Lee, his assistant, stepped out from the back seat, a folder in hand. At 30 years old, sharp-minded and efficient worry showed clearly behind her glasses. Ethan tugged lightly at his sleeve, adjusting the line of his suit. "I am fine, Jasmine. I mean it. North Star has had issues lately. I have flown with them for more than 10 years. I know." But he cut her off with a small, thin smile, meant more to reassure her than himself. The sky is not falling. The camera held that smile for 1 second, long enough for the audience to understand he was wrong. Inside the terminal, cold white light washed across Ethan's face, reflecting back through the wide glass. Hundreds of people passed him, yet not a single one recognized who he was. That had never bothered him. Sometimes, invisibility was an advantage. Ethan rolled his suitcase with one hand, carrying a black leather briefcase in the other, inside it. The confidential documents for the merger with Apex Systems. Pages capable of creating one of the largest tech companies in the country. He knew that. Apex knew that. And unfortunately, someone else knew that too. The first-class check-in counter of North Star gleamed with Nordic minimalist luxury. Only one staff member stood there, Brad Wilson, about 38, gelled hair, a smile that never reached his eyes. The camera caught the detail others might miss when he saw Ethan approach. Brad's smile vanished for half a second. A tiny movement, sharp as cold metal. Ethan placed his passport on the counter. "Good morning." Brad did not return the greeting. He glanced at the passport, then at Ethan, then back at the passport, as if the two did not logically belong together. Brad asked, voice dry as sandpaper. Ethan handed it over. Brad checked it longer than necessary. Far too long. The camera zoomed into his eyes, the corners tightening. "Do you need anything else?" Ethan asked, calmly. Brad ignored the question and instead asked, "You purchased a first-class ticket?" A meaningless question delivered with a tone that made its real meaning unmistakable, questioning whether Ethan had any right to be standing here. "Yes," Ethan replied, eyes steady on Brad. Brad tapped the keyboard. The monitor's glow reflected off his face, and with every keystroke his expression seemed to sour further. Finally, one moment, he muttered, lifting the internal phone. The camera shifted to Ethan. His expression did not change, but his breathing slowed. Instinct, the kind he had honed his entire life in rooms thick with prejudice, whispered that something was slipping off course. Brad whispered into the phone, glancing at Ethan 3 times. "Good," he said, at last ending the call with a subtle pointed click. He handed back the passport and boarding pass. "You may enter the lounge." No smile. No enjoy your flight like he had given the passenger before. Only a cold look filled with something Ethan had seen far too often, suspicion judgment, and the quiet assumption that you do not belong here. Jasmine had warned him. Ethan ignored it. But today what he ignored would become a storm, big enough to tear through his entire career. The first-class lounge of North Star radiated soft gold light leather sofas, slow jazz drifting like the heartbeat of someone assured of their place in the world. Ethan entered. His eyes swept the room. Silver-haired executives in expensive suits, crystal watches, everyone greeted by name as they walked in. Ethan, however, was met with boarding pass, the receptionist asked, offering no smile. He handed it over. She looked from the pass to his face, twice, as if something did not match. Ah, yes. Welcome. No welcome drink. No offer of assistance. No unspoken acknowledgement shared among the usual occupants of that room. Only distance. Ethan opened his laptop, forcing himself to focus. The narration slowed. His breathing steady, his posture upright, his wrist moving lightly as he typed. But his eyes from time to time lifted, a habit of self-defense learned in Detroit. And each time they lifted, he saw it glances sliding over him, then quickly away, as if he were a stray ink mark on a white page. The camera circled him slowly, like orbiting a man, unaware that the ground beneath him was beginning to crack. When the boarding announcement sounded, Ethan packed up and stood. He had no idea. In the far corner of the lounge, Sarah Thompson, a flight attendant on his flight, was watching him. Her gaze drifted from his immaculate shoes to the elegant leather briefcase, then to his face. For a moment, just a moment, she narrowed her eyes, as if trying to match him with a template already etched into her mind. She turned to Brad, who had just entered the lounge. "Is that him?" she whispered. Brad nodded. "Yes. Seat 2A. Sarah's lips curved slightly. Not a smile. Something far more dangerous certainty that she had the authority to put him in his proper place. The camera captured that micro-expression for half a second. Enough for the audience to understand Ethan's fate had been sealed right then. The scene shifted quickly. The boarding gate, passengers lining up, first class only. Sarah said sweetly, a blade hidden beneath sugar. Ethan approached. Sarah checked his boarding pass for the second time, even though he had already scanned it. She said nothing, only nodded, but in her eyes, something unreadable flickered. When Ethan settled into seat 2A, the camera slid along the first-class cabin, wide leather seats, warm golden lights, the faint aroma of fresh roasted coffee, a quiet, refined sanctuary, a place meant for certain customers. And clearly to some people here, Ethan did not fit that category. Sarah approached. "Boarding pass, please." Ethan looked up, frowning slightly. "I just gave it to you. I need to verify again." Ethan handed it over. She stared at it. Long. Too long. Ethan felt his throat tighten. That familiar sensation, the sense that someone was searching for a justification to push him out of the frame. Sarah returned the pass without a word. No explanation. No apology. Ethan opened his laptop, but his hand froze mid-air. A vague unease seeped through him, a Detroit instinct he had relied on many times. Something was wrong, and his instinct was right. because less than 10 minutes later, heavy footsteps approached, labored breathing. A suitcase dragged across the floor like metal scraping stone. A man appeared at the entrance to first class. William Preston, about 45, vice president of Rival Tech, the man who had tried to kill Carter Dynamics before it ever found its footing. His shirt wrinkled his tie, loose the rushed look of someone accustomed to preferential treatment. When he spotted Ethan, he smiled, a victorious smile. And then it began. Sarah and Brad whispered together. Their eyes flicked toward Ethan. A small nod. A decision had already been made. Brad stepped to seat 2A. "Mr. Carter," he said with fake politeness, "there is a system error regarding your reservation." The camera zoomed in on Ethan's face, his eyes widening slightly, his lips tightening, his breath pausing for one beat. This was the moment the crack began. Ethan stared directly at Brad. "Impossible. I booked this seat 3 weeks ago." Brad shook his head gently, as if Ethan were a child who simply did not understand. "I understand, but the system says otherwise." "What does the system say?" "It says you are assigned to seat 29B. 29B. A middle seat. Economy." Everything froze. "You must be joking," Ethan said quietly, each word sharp. "I have the boarding pass confirmation payment. I am a platinum member of North Star." Brad shrugged. "We need this seat for a passenger with a valid reservation." The camera shifted to William Preston, standing behind Brad, lips curled in a cruel smile. Plot twist. He had not arrived late because of traffic. He had arrived late because he knew someone would give up a seat for him, and that someone had to be Ethan Carter. Ethan looked around the cabin. No one spoke. No one met his eyes. Some pretended to be busy. Some looked at their phones. Some observed him with pity or curiosity. Ethan felt 8 years old again in that dim Detroit apartment, watching his father being taken away while his mother could do nothing. His chest tightened. But this time he was no child. His voice fell cold as northern wind. "I want the full names of everyone involved in this decision." Sarah tilted her head. "You are causing a disturbance, Mr. Carter." "No," Ethan said, "I am documenting the truth." A spark of irritation mixed with disdain flashed in Sarah's eyes. "Sit in your assigned seat, or you will be removed from the aircraft." Ethan held her gaze. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Then he stood. Not because he was defeated, but because he knew this game would not end on this plane. It would end somewhere he held all the power. As Ethan walked past the curtain, dividing first class and economy, the camera followed close behind. In that moment, the narration rose. They thought they had put him in his place, but in reality, they had handed him the reason to dismantle their entire system. And Ethan Carter entered the economy cabin, slow, steady, like a man walking into a battlefield he intended to win with his mind, rather than his fists. In that moment, the sky didn't yet know that a storm had been born, but it would know. Very soon. The economy cabin felt suffocating the moment Ethan stepped inside. Not because the space was cramped. Not because the rows were packed together like iron bars. But because the second he entered, dozens of eyes turned toward him as if he had walked into the wrong class, the wrong doorway, the wrong world. The camera swept from left to right. A middle-aged man frowned. A young woman looked at him with pity. A couple whispered to each other, as if afraid he might hear them. Ethan did not look at anyone. He did not lower his head. He did not change his expression. He simply walked each slow, heavy step, landing as if he were walking once again on Detroit's cracked pavement. Row 29, the middle seat. One of those seats that made a person feel trapped between two walls of bodies and cheap perfume. Ethan set down his leather briefcase, steadying his breath so the storm inside his chest would not spill out. As he lowered himself into the seat, a quiet but firm voice spoke beside him. Messed up. Completely messed up. He turned. A woman in her early 30s, brown hair tied neatly back, sharp but gentle eyes, looked at him with an expression unlike any he had seen that morning. Not curious, not judgmental, not pitying, just fair. You didn't deserve that, she said softly, as if afraid others might hear. Ethan frowned the first time his guard had dropped all morning. You saw everything. I was right behind you during boarding. She tilted her head. I am Taylor. Taylor Brooks. Ethan gripped the edge of his seat. Taylor lowered her voice even more. And I am a civil rights attorney. The camera zoomed in on Ethan's eyes, a flicker of surprise, cracking the ice around him. Taylor lifted her phone. I recorded the last part. Not much, but enough to show they treated you with bias. Not because of a system error. Ethan looked at the screen. The video played back Brad, whispering to Sarah. Sarah glancing at Ethan, a small, knowing smirk. Then the final nod, the one that sealed the fate of his seat. Ethan's hand curled slowly into a fist. The airplane engines roared, preparing for takeoff. Ethan tried to open his laptop, but the tray table was too small. The seat in front pressed back against his chest, the screen nearly touching him. His breath clouded the glass, fogging it little by little. He needed to review the documents for Apex. He needed to revise the presentation. He needed everything to be perfect. But every sound from crying children to scraping seats to the sharp mix of food and cheap perfume pressed on him like a vice, trying to crush the ability he was most proud of. He leaned his head back and closed his eyes. Do not break. Not now. Ethan had lived with pressure since the day he learned his father had been taken away in handcuffs. He was used to injustice, used to skeptical eyes, used to working twice as hard to be valued half as much. But today, for the first time in years, he felt a humiliation he thought he had left behind in Detroit. Taylor watched him. This wasn't your fault. Ethan opened his eyes. That is what people always say, he murmured, voice low and rough. But the consequences still fall on me. Taylor inhaled softly. True, but the multi-million-dollar contract or your reputation isn't the point right now. What they did this morning was wrong. Serious. Systemic. Ethan fell silent. The narration slowed, deep like a cello note in the dark. He had no idea that the woman sitting beside him would become the most important witness in the greatest battle of his life. Midway through the flight, Ethan stood to go to the restroom. As he stepped behind the curtain, separating economy from the flight attendant's prep area, he heard whispers, Sarah's voice, and another attendant's. The imaginary camera pressed against the doorframe. Sarah let out a half laugh. He really thought he belonged in first class. Her voice was quiet, but every word carried venom. Brad said he is some CEO or whatever, never heard of him. The other replied, even if he is, he sure doesn't look like the type of VIP we serve. Sarah lowered her tone, mocking. Well, now he is sitting exactly where he should be. Ethan froze. No movement. No deep breath. He simply stared at his own hands as they trembled lightly. Not from anger. Not from hurt. But from every memory of Detroit MIT, every dismissal, every underestimation flooding back at once. Position was never given to him easily. He always had to fight for it. Swallowing every drop of internal bloodshed, Ethan turned back toward his seat. Taylor saw the change in his face. Silence. Danger. Like steel pulled red-hot from a furnace. "Are you okay?" Ethan sat down, yanked the seatbelt, the click loud and sharp. "No. But I will be." His voice dropped steady and dark. "But North Star Airways will not be." Taylor narrowed her eyes, understanding dawning. "What are you planning to do?" Ethan turned toward her, his gaze cutting through layers of air. "I am not just going to sue them." Taylor blinked. "I want to dismantle the system that made them think they could treat me like that." When the plane landed in San Francisco, Ethan had to wait an extra 12 minutes just to exit the cramped aisle. Each minute stabbed at him like a pin. If he had been in first class, he would have been the first to walk out. If he had been in first class, he would already be in a taxi. If he had been in first class, he would have arrived at Apex on time. Instead, he was stuck in row 29, surrounded by passengers who avoided looking at the humiliation that had unfolded. The camera focused on his hand, gripping the briefcase handle, until his knuckles turned white. He remained outwardly calm, but inside him, a storm was forming. And no one in the first-class cabin knew that storm would soon tear through an entire airline. Outside the airport, the California wind blew hard. Ethan rushed out, calling a car, his eyes on the clock. 10 minutes late. 15 minutes late. 20 minutes late. Each passing minute clawed at the career he had built with such difficulty. When he finally reached Apex Systems, he sprinted straight into the boardroom. 5 people rose when he entered, their expressions colder than the wind outside. Mr. Carter CEO Jonathan Morris said, his voice sharp as cracked glass. "We were beginning to think you were not coming." Ethan stood straight, breath heavy, but face unreadable. "Apologies." "There was an issue with the flight." Morris lifted a brow. "Or were you simply unprepared?" The first fracture. In Ethan's chest, in Morris's eyes, in a partnership worth billions. Ethan began presenting, but his laptop failed to load the documents in time. His mind was exhausted. His body ached from 3 hours crushed in an economy seat. One wrong number, one misaligned chart, one repeated sentence. The Apex board's eyes changed instantly. Their confidence in Carter Dynamics wavered. Ethan saw it, felt every inch of its collapse. And it hurt more than any discrimination that morning. Then a message buzzed on his phone. From Taylor. He opened it under the table. "FYI. The man who took your seat. Preston." He talked about the Carter deal, the whole flight. The camera zoomed deep into Ethan's eyes. Every missing piece snapped into place. This was not just prejudice, not just humiliation, not just intent. This was an economic attack, a theft of strategic information, and North Star had enabled it. Ethan straightened in his chair, his breath steadied, his gaze transformed. No more pain, no more hesitation. Only one thing remained. Retaliation. A retaliation that would make North Star Airways remember forever that they had pushed the wrong man out of first class. The doorway to that battle opened that very day, and Ethan Carter stepped through it, not as a victim, but as a storm. Night fell over San Francisco, like a curtain pulled tight, covering the city in weary neon light. Glass towers reflected their silhouettes into the foggy sky, as if they too were struggling to see their own future clearly. Ethan Carter stood alone in his high-rise hotel room, looking down at the stream of headlights along Highway 101. Every light was a person. Every person a story. And his own story had just taken a turn no one on earth could have imagined. He loosened his tie, dropped into the chair. The sound of his back hitting the leather was sharp, like the switch that awakened the fury sleeping beneath his controlled exterior. On the coffee table lay three things: his phone, his laptop, and the notes from the failed meeting with Apex. Salvation weapons and evidence sitting next to one another, as if waiting for him to decide which to spare and which to destroy. The camera circled him slowly, capturing every detail: the faint crease near his eyes, the tight line of his jaw, the hand resting on his knee while his thumb tapped rhythmically, his habit whenever his thoughts reached their most dangerous edge. Ethan inhaled deeply, slowly, deliberately. They had attacked his dignity. They had sabotaged his multi-billion-dollar deal. But worse, they believed they could do all of it without consequences. His phone vibrated. The name lit up: Taylor Brooks. Ethan picked up. "You are not asleep, are you?" Taylor asked, tired but sharp. "Cannot sleep. Me neither." A heavy silence lingered. Then Taylor spoke low and clear. "I reviewed the video, and I checked the records. North Star has a long history of discrimination. A very long history." Ethan closed his eyes. "How many cases?" 37 in the last 2 years. "And that is only what leaked. The buried ones, I have not reached those yet." Ethan opened his eyes. The neon outside cast a cold blue over his face. "What are you planning to do?" she asked. There was no doubt in her tone, only curiosity and a hint of fear. Ethan stood, walked to the window and looked out over the city. "Not sue." Taylor paused, stunned. "Not sue. With all this evidence, a lawsuit only makes them pay money." Ethan's voice slowed, each word sharp enough to cut steel. "I want them to pay with their system." The camera tightened on his mouth, not smiling, but curving ever so slightly, the kind of expression people recognized as a sign of incoming devastation. Taylor Ethan said, "I need everything. Every record of racial bias, every buried report, every involved employee, and most importantly, every major business relationship North Star depends on." Taylor did not ask why. She simply answered, "I will send it within 24 hours. The next morning, 7:11. Ethan had been awake long before dawn. He sat at the hotel desk, blue laptop light glowing on his face, making him look like a man preparing to wage war against the galaxy. A knock sounded. Ethan opened the door. Jasmine Lee stood there, hair tied, high eyes red from lack of sleep, an iPad in hand. "Whatever you need." "I finished," she said, voice hoarse but determined. Ethan let her inside. "I watched the news last night," Jasmine said. "Apex seems upset." "They are," Ethan replied, eyes glued to the screen. "They think I was unprepared. They think I was unprofessional." "But you were prepared." "Extremely." Jasmine exhaled sharply. "Just because of North Star," she muttered, clenching a fist. "They treated you like that." Ethan turned the laptop toward her. "Look at this." The screen displayed a massive financial spreadsheet. The top line highlighted in red Carter Dynamics and subsidiaries' annual spending with North Star Airways, $20,480,000. Jasmine's jaw dropped. "Oh my God," Ethan flipped to the next page. Companies partnered with Carter Dynamics combined annual spending, $9,700,000. Total more than $30 million in steady annual revenue. Jasmine leaned back, stunned. "They survived because of you." "Yes." "And they treated you like garbage." "Yes." "So what are you going to do with this number?" Ethan leaned back, laced his fingers, his gaze sharp enough to slice glass. "Take it back." His voice was not loud, not aggressive, not angry, but it was the kind of voice every employee recognized instantly, the voice that meant he was about to do something irreversible. That evening, Ethan held a remote video meeting with the senior leadership of Carter Dynamics. 9 squares appeared on screen, each with a tense face. Jordan Price, Chief Financial Officer. Lisa Nguyen, Head of Human Resources. Dean Harlow, Chief Legal Officer, and several other senior managers. Ethan appeared in the center square. The lighting in his room was darker than usual, the glow of the screen casting his face in the shadows of a strategist preparing for the biggest campaign of his life. "We have a problem," Ethan began. Jordan leaned back. Apex. Not just Apex. Ethan played the video Taylor had sent. The room fell silent for 14 straight seconds as the footage showed Sarah and Brad deliberately removing him from seat 2A. 14 seconds long enough for viewers to hear their own heartbeat. Jordan broke the silence first. "Ethan, that is clear racial discrimination on camera." Lisa added, "They knew you were platinum. They knew you were the CEO. And they still thought they could do that." Ethan replied, "The issue is in the word thought. They thought they could do it because their system allows it." He switched to another slide. Internal complaint files from North Star. 37 cases. Repeat offenders. Familiar patterns. Victims too afraid to complain again for fear of being banned from flying. Lisa covered her mouth, horrified. "My God, this is not an accident. This is culture." Jordan tightened his grip on his chair. "And we are feeding that culture with $30 million a year." The camera returned to Ethan. Not anymore. Every face on screen turned toward him. Ethan's eyes burned like a spark catching fire. "I will not sue them yet. I will not send the video to the media yet. I will give them one chance to change. And if they refuse," he stared directly into the camera, "I will let the entire country know what they did." Jordan exhaled heavily. "You want to destroy them?" Ethan answered without hesitation. "I want to reform them. Destroying them depends on their response." When the meeting ended, Ethan stood alone in the room, his shadow stretching across the carpet like a drawn blade. He closed his eyes. Detroit appeared in his mind. MIT. Every door that slammed shut, every suspicious look, every, "Are you sure you are in the right room?" And yesterday morning, when Sarah asked for his boarding pass the 3rd time. Ethan opened his eyes. No darkness remained, only steel. His phone buzzed. A message from Jasmine, North Star CEO Gregory Palmer, agreed to an emergency meeting with you next week. A second message. They have no idea you have the video and internal evidence. A third. They think this is just a customer service issue. Ethan set his phone down, stared out the window, his eyes reflecting the city lights like 2 crossed blades. "They want a lesson," he whispered. "I will teach it." The narration deepened. This was no longer about a seat, no longer about a flight. This was about a system that believed it could humiliate a man without realizing that man held the power to change the fate of their entire company. And as night settled over San Francisco, Ethan Carter wrote the first line of the plan that would reshape the American sky forever. Morning in Chicago was never gentle. It was always cold, always gray, always carrying the feeling that the city was testing whether you had enough endurance to walk out the door. But today, the sky felt stretched tight by an invisible pressure. The camera widened from the 40th floor of Carter Dynamics. Ethan Carter stood before the glass wall, arms folded, face emotionless. But if one looked closely, His breathing was unnaturally steady, as if his body were preparing for a confrontation with no retreat. Jasmine stepped into the room. "They're in the elevator," she said, voice small but tense. "How many?" Ethan asked. "5 people from North Star. CEO Gregory Palmer is leading them." Ethan gave a slight nod, not a response, but a way of locking down his emotions before the battle began. "Cameras ready?" "Yes." "Evidence prepared." "Everything is in the conference room." Ethan turned the light from the window, dividing his face into 2 halves, one soft one, cold. "Good," he said. "Today they will look at themselves in the mirror." The elevator doors opened. Gregory Palmer, CEO of North Star Airways, stepped out first. He was around 52 tall salt and pepper hair, combed neatly, a grey luxury coat shoes without a single scratch. A man from a world that always assumed the path would clear for him. But when he saw the conference room of Carter Dynamics, his expression faltered for half a second. The setting was not the typical business meeting he expected. The camera moved fast. The long table with white overhead lights focused directly on the seats reserved for North Star. The giant screen already on with a black background, waiting for data, a professional camera positioned in the corner, and most notably, 3 empty chairs placed opposite North Star chairs for people Gregory Palmer had no idea would appear. Ethan stood at the far end of the table, hands resting on the back of a chair, shoulders straight like a steel bar. Jordan Price and Lisa Nguyen sat beside him, their eyes cold, as if waiting for the signal to throw truth at North Star's face. Gregory approached, trying to maintain a polite smile. "Mr. Carter, thank you for inviting us to discuss the contract. This is not a contract meeting." Ethan cut him off. His voice was not loud, but each word hit with the weight of solid lead. Gregory froze mid-step. 2 executives behind him exchanged nervous glances. Ethan gestured to the chairs. "Sit. We begin." As soon as North Star sat down, Jasmine entered and closed the door. The click echoed like a lock, sealing the room into an arena. Ethan didn't sit. He stood like a judge, or someone preparing to read charges. He pressed a button on the remote. The screen lit up. A single line appeared, Flight 281 incident record. Cold white light reflected off Gregory and his team, making them look like suspects being interrogated in a precinct room. Gregory cleared his throat. "Ethan, that incident was a misunderstanding. We apologized, and numbered Ethan's eyes did not blink. I am not finished." He pressed another button. Taylor's video appeared. Sarah Thompson checking Ethan's boarding pass 3 times. Brad whispering. Sarah's crooked smile, her dismissive look. Preston stepping confidently into first class, like a man certain the victory was already his. Gregory's face drained of color. The 2 executives behind him shifted uncomfortably, as if sitting on ice. When the video ended, Ethan set the remote on the table. The sharp click filled the room. "What explanation do you have for this?" he asked. Gregory swallowed. He opened his mouth, but only air came out. He turned to Diane Schultz, his chief legal officer. But Diane had nothing to say. Clearly, they never expected Ethan to have evidence. Ethan began walking slowly along the table, the camera following him from a low angle, as if filming an anti-hero preparing to reveal his final move. "I was not angry about the seat change," Ethan said quietly. "I was angry because your so-called system error only happens to passengers who look like me." He stopped directly in front of Gregory. "What angers me more is that you helped Preston, my competitor, sit in the seat I paid for. You helped him gain access to confidential documents about the Apex deal." Gregory glanced at his team, but they lowered their heads. No one dared to breathe too loudly. Ethan pressed another button. A slide appeared filled with North Star internal complaint records. 37 cases of racial discrimination. 0 corrective actions. Names involved Brad Wilson, Sarah Thompson, shift manager Derek Mullins. Lisa Nguyen looked straight at Gregory. A major airline allowing this to exist, you call that a misunderstanding, Jordan added. And Carter Dynamics spends more than $20 million a year with you. Ethan said, more than 30 million, including partner companies. Gregory's jaw tightened. His voice shook. There may have been some procedural errors. But you must understand, no, Ethan replied. You must understand. He pressed another button. The door opened. 3 people walked in. A spotlight of the room's lighting fell on them like a stage cue. Dr. Alicia Foster, CEO of a biotechnology firm. Terrell Washington, venture capitalist. James Baldwin, CFO of a major retail conglomerate. 3 people, all black. 3 people who had also been mistreated by North Star. 3 people Ethan had invited. Gregory's mouth fell open. Diane covered her forehead. One North Star executive whispered, "We are finished." The trio sat beside Ethan. Dr. Foster spoke, first voice sharp as ice. "Last month they changed my seat. Also, a system error." Terrell added, "They downgraded me, even when first class still had empty seats." James leaned in. "They made me go through baggage inspection 6 times. It was blatant, Mr. Palmer." Gregory stared at the table. His posture collapsed, as if a piece of his spine had gone missing. Ethan placed both hands on the table and leaned forward. "Do you see the problem now?" His voice dropped to a dangerous softness, but each word hit like a hammer. "Not 1 case. Not 2. This is a system you allowed to grow." Gregory tried to speak, but failed. Sweat gathered at his temples. Ethan continued, now sounding far more dangerous than angry. "You thought I was just a customer, but you actually treated the person who funds 12% of your corporate revenue this way." North Star's CFO blanched. For the first time, Gregory looked at Ethan not as a customer, but as the man who could destroy his entire empire. Ethan returned to his chair, sat slowly, decisively. "And now," he said, "you will hear my conditions." No one objected. No one moved. First, Ethan said, "Terminate immediately Brad Wilson, Sarah Thompson, and every manager who buried complaint reports." Gregory closed his eyes. 1 second, 2 seconds. Then he nodded. Second, Ethan continued, "Create a Chief Diversity Officer position with authority equal to your Chief Operations Officer." Diane swallowed. "That will cost a great deal." Ethan looked directly at her. "Not as much as losing $30 million a year." Diane fell silent. Third, Ethan said, "Rebuild your entire seating system. No one can alter a seat assignment without leaving a trace." Fourth, Ethan said slowly, "A public apology. Transparent, admitting fault, and committing to reform." Gregory grimaced as if Ethan had asked him to sign away the company. Finally, he said, "We will consider it." Ethan replied immediately, "No. You will accept." And he placed on the table the contract terminating all services between Carter Dynamics and North Star, along with a press letter ready to be released. Gregory looked at the document. His hand trembled. The camera zoomed in. His chest rose quickly. His pupils tightened. His skin paled. In that moment, everyone understood. North Star had no escape. And they realized something even more terrifying. They thought they had pushed Ethan Carter out of first class. But in reality, they had pushed their entire company out of the sky. The conference room door closed behind Gregory Palmer, and the North Star team, leaving behind a heavy silence, thick like gunpowder smoke, that had not yet settled. Ethan did not stand immediately. He remained seated, fingers, interlocked eyes, fixed on the door that had just shut. Not looking at the door itself, but through it toward the next 30 minutes, the next 2 hours the next day, when North Star would be forced to face what they had created. The camera filmed him from behind, at a slight diagonal angle, highlighting the strong line of his shoulders, the posture of a warrior resting after the first strike, preparing for the second. Beside him, Dr. Alicia Foster exhaled softly but deeply. "They know they lost," she said. Ethan tilted his head slightly. "They do not know yet," he replied. "But they will." His voice held no anger, no triumph, only truth. A truth he had carved from tears, setbacks, and decades of pushing against the biases of a world in white suits. In the adjacent conference room, Gregory Palmer collapsed into his chair. The man who once shook global boardrooms with a sentence now trembled lightly in his thumb. Diane Schultz, the chief legal officer, snapped her laptop shut the click, sounding like the final shot of the battle they had just lost. Gregory Diane began. "Don't," he said, voice cracking. "I do not want to hear it." Michael Bennett, the director of customer service, rubbed his face. "He has everything," he whispered. "Not just the video, not just the witnesses. He has a network of corporations spending tens of millions every year." Diane swallowed hard. Who did we think he was? Gregory closed his eyes. The narration echoed like a slow drumbeat. They thought he was a passenger, but he is an ecosystem that can stop North Star from breathing. The camera returned to the main room. Ethan stood. His chair slid back slightly, the sound of metal scraping out cold and sharp. Jordan Ethan said, "Prepare a draft of the press release. 2 versions." Jordan looked up. "Which one first? The good one," Ethan replied. "The one they receive if they sign the terms." "And the other?" Lisa asked. Ethan looked straight at her. "The one they will receive if they are foolish." A small tightening of her lips. She understood instantly. Ethan turned to Taylor, who was standing near the door. "You reviewed the legal summary?" Taylor nodded. "They have no escape. If this becomes public, North Star will face federal investigation. The Department of Transportation, the FAA, even the Department of Justice could step in." Ethan stepped closer, lowering his voice to a near whisper. "Now I need you to do the hardest thing." Taylor raised a brow. "Stay silent," she smirked. "You say that as if I do not know how to play the long game." Ethan's eyes softened with gratitude. "Thank you." When North Star exited the building, the Chicago sky suddenly darkened, a thick cloud curling above, as if the weather itself understood what had just occurred. The camera pulled back to show Carter, Dynamics rising like a fortress, while the North Star team looked small, almost fragile, stepping out of the revolving doors. No one spoke. No one dared. They all understood their next meeting with the North Star board would not be a discussion. It would be a trial. That evening, Ethan sat in his private office, the light casting sharp lines across his face, every detail drawn as tight as the string of a violin. Jasmine entered, holding a thick folder. "They are in an emergency meeting," she said. North Star called a board session at 5 in the afternoon, and it has lasted nearly 3 hours. "To discuss my terms, absolutely." She set the folder on his desk. "And one more thing." Ethan looked up. "What is it?" "New data from a whistleblower. Internal North Star emails." Ethan frowned and opened the documents. By page 2, his hand stopped turning. Blood rushed to his face, not from anger, but from how clearly the truth revealed itself. An email from a North Star manager to the head of HR read, "Our first class, passengers feel more comfortable when the cabin is not too diverse." Another, maintaining uniformity in first class is essential to protecting the brand. And worst of all, if an unsuitable passenger is placed in first class, find reasons to reassign or offer a courtesy upgrade to someone else. The camera zoomed into Ethan's eyes. Slow, deep, the kind of stare that dimmed even the office lights around him. Jasmine watched him. "Are you okay?" Ethan inhaled deeply and set the folder down. "No," he said quietly, "but I am doing better than the people they pushed out of those seats." Night fell over Chicago. A sudden downpour crashed against the city, heavy, relentless. Ethan stood at his office window, watching raindrops slam against the glass, like fingers tapping time, reminding him that each passing minute peeled away another layer of truth. The narration rose. Injustice does not grow in darkness. It grows because those in power believe they will never be removed from the light. And today, Ethan was that light. He returned to his desk and called Taylor. How many potential witnesses beyond the 3 who were here today? Taylor responded instantly, as if expecting the question. 12. But only 3 have strong evidence. The rest are mostly testimonies. Collect them all, Ethan said. I want North Star to understand this is not one bad employee. This is a pattern. Got it. Ethan hung up. The camera zoomed in on his fingers, tapping the desk 3 firm, decisive beats. His reflex whenever he made a decision that could not be reversed. 9 o'clock. An email from Gregory Palmer appeared in Ethan's inbox. The subject line carried only 3 words. We need time. Ethan opened it. The message was short, drained of strength. We acknowledge that serious issues occurred. But some of your requests exceed my personal authority. Please allow us 24 hours to meet with our board. Ethan closed his eyes. 24 hours. Not a refusal. Not an acceptance. Just a plea from a man trying to keep his ship afloat while water filled the hull. Ethan replied with 1 sentence. 24 hours is fine. After that, the sky changes. He pressed send. Without hesitation, the camera slowly zoomed out, leaving Ethan alone in his office. The lights dimmed. The rain continued. But his face was no longer the face of a man who had been humiliated. It was the face of someone preparing to rewrite the rules. The face of a man who now understood that they had not merely pushed him out of first class, they had handed him the power to pull an entire airline out of the sky. The wall clock in the CEO office of North Star Airways gave a single, dry click. A small sound, yet in a room full of people it struck like an alarm. Gregory Palmer stood by the window, his back slightly bent, both hands gripping the glass frame, as if letting go would make him fall out of his own life. Inside the room, North Star's leadership sat in silence. Not the silence of calm, but the silence of people watching their fate hang by a thread, with Ethan Carter holding the other end. The camera moved slowly across the room, tense faces, sweat-dampening shirt collars, fingers gripping pens as if ready to snap them in half. Diane Schultz, the chief legal officer, spoke first. Gregory, 24 hours is not enough. Carter's demands. Gregory turned sharply, his eyes red, as if he had not slept for a week. Diane, those are not demands. That is an ultimatum. He threw the folder onto the table, papers scattered across the polished wood surface. Every page told the same truth. 37 complaints, internal emails, video evidence the hidden family connection between William Preston and North Star's own CEO, and the looming threat of losing $30 million in annual revenue. Michael Bennett swallowed hard. If Carter goes public, we lose at least 18% of our stock value in 48 hours. Maybe more, Diane added. And federal investigation is likely. If the FAA steps in, we stop, Gregory snapped. The camera zoomed close to his trembling eyes. Do not speak, as if this is already over. Cut to Carter Dynamics headquarters, warm light filling the main conference room. Ethan walked in like a commander who had slept just enough before the next battle. Jasmine stood ready, laptop in hand. They replied to your email, she said. They sound desperate. Ethan pulled out a chair and sat. Read it. Jasmine opened the message. It contained only 2 lines. We propose renegotiating. Some terms may be flexible. Please reconsider. Ethan smiled, a thin blade of a smile. Someone is afraid. Jasmine shivered slightly. Not because Ethan was cruel, but because he was too calm. The calm of a man who had been forced out of first class in front of dozens of people. The calm of a boy who grew up under the weight of judgmental eyes. The calm of someone who won battles after the world already declared he would lose. Jordan Price entered, carrying an even thicker folder than yesterday. Ethan, he said. Another whistleblower came forward. Ethan straightened. What now? Jordan opened the file. 1 page. Only 1. But it was enough to light a fuse. An email from a senior North Star manager. If an unsuitable passenger ends up in first class, move them to economy as soon as possible. Use technical reasons if necessary. And at the bottom, a chilling note. Minimize black passengers in first class. Improves overall experience. Jasmine inhaled sharply. Her hand shook. Jordan cursed under his breath. Ethan simply closed his eyes for a few seconds, as if a part of his soul, long wounded, had just been called by its real name. He opened his eyes. They have dug their own grave. Cut to North Star's boardroom. The air felt thin, almost starved of oxygen. Diane said, "We cannot fight him. There is no way." Michael shot up from his chair. "What about countersuing extortion corporate threats?" Diane turned eyes cold. "Michael, do not be foolish. He issued commercial terms, perfectly legal." Gregory sank into his chair, face pale. He truly knows what he is doing. Diane nodded. He is not a helpless victim. He is the CEO of a $2 billion corporation, a strategist, calculated. Michael grabbed a glass of water, his hand trembling so badly the liquid spilled over the sides. "So you are telling me we kicked out of first class a man who could actually make North Star collapse?" Gregory let out a short, humorless laugh. "Not just collapse. He could turn us into the national symbol of racial discrimination in the American airline industry." The room fell into suffocating silence, heavy, thick with defeat. Back at Carter Dynamics, Taylor Brooks walked in. "Ethan," she said, "I spoke with 3 additional victims. They are willing to testify if North Star refuses reform." Ethan nodded. "Good." Taylor sat across from him. "But I need to ask, how far will you go? Destroy them or force them to change?" The camera tightened on Ethan. He did not answer immediately. He stood and walked to the glass wall. Chicago stretched beneath him, the yellow city lights forming something like a documentary frame about ambition and survival. "Taylor," he said slowly, "if I wanted to destroy them, I would have done it already." 1 click. He turned. "They cost me a multi-billion-dollar deal. They made me walk under hateful stares. They reminded me of being 14 when a supermarket guard checked my backpack while the other kids walked through untouched." His voice lowered. But destroying an empire does not make the world better. It only makes me resemble them. A quiet pause, beautiful in its heaviness. "So what do you want?" Taylor asked. Ethan answered instantly. "I want to change the airline industry." The camera shifted again. Chicago at night wind, sweeping over overpasses, lights reflecting off the glass of Carter Dynamics Tower. Music dropped to a deeper, more intense rhythm. Ethan and his leadership team entered the strategy room, where they began outlining a plan that would redefine how the country recognized racial discrimination in the air. Jordan spread a corporate relationship chart across the table. "Here it is," he said. "The full network of companies connected to North Star. 14 rely on them directly." Lisa added a thick stack of reports. "If we pull our contract, at least 7 will follow. Financial pressure begins immediately." Ethan looked at all of them. "We are not threatening. We are requiring them to do what is right." Jasmine asked, "You think they will comply?" Ethan smiled. "I do not trust them. I trust fear." 5 in the morning, a new day. Gregory Palmer still had not slept. His hands shook as he reread Ethan's demands: an independent racial bias, oversight body termination of all involved employees, a complete rebuild of the seat assignment system, a public apology, and 2 years of mandatory monitoring. Michael said, "If we agree to all this, North Star will become a different company." Gregory exhaled, lips curling just slightly. "Perhaps it is time." The small sentence hit like a slab of stone. 8 in the morning. Ethan received an email. North Star's board will hold their final emergency meeting at 9 o'clock. Decision will be delivered at 11. Ethan set his phone down and took a long breath. Jasmine asked, "What do you think they will choose?" Ethan answered, eyes steady, "The right to survive." 10:58 in the morning. Carter Dynamics conference room was silent as stone. 11 o'clock. The email arrived. Ethan opened it. The camera zoomed in slowly. 6 words. "We accept all your terms," and a small line beneath effective immediately. Ethan closed his eyes. Not relief, not triumph, but the feeling of justice finally delivered to its rightful place. He opened his eyes, looked at his team. "Begin phase 2, he said. Taylor asked, "What is phase 2? Ethan replied, "Rebuilding the sky." And the scene ended with a high aerial shot of Chicago, shining under the midday sun, as if the world itself waited to witness his next battle. 11:12 in the morning. The air inside Carter Dynamics' strategy room was thick enough to cut with a blade. Sunlight streamed through the tall glass wall and struck the company logo, forming a halo, as if preparing for a formal execution. Ethan Carter stood at the head of the table spine, straight, both hands resting on the dark wood surface. No trembling, no anger. Only the steady resolve of a man who understood this moment would one day appear in management textbooks. The door opened. Gregory Palmer entered, first followed by Diane Schultz, the Chief Legal Officer, Michael Bennett, the Director of Customer Service, Thomas Reed, the Chief Operations Officer, and finally Brad Wilson and Sarah Thompson. The camera swept the room, capturing each face. Brad tried to maintain his usual arrogance, but his fingers dug into the folder he carried. Sarah was pale hollow, looking like someone who had not slept all night. Gregory stood stiff with the rigid quiet of a man who knew he no longer controlled the narrative. Ethan did not invite them to sit. He looked straight at Gregory with a calmness that made Diane swallow hard. "Welcome," Ethan said. His voice low, steady, not loud, yet it seemed the walls echoed every syllable back. Gregory forced a polite smile. "Thank you, Ethan." Ethan raised his hand, signaling him to stop. "We are not here for pleasantries, Mr. Palmer." The camera captured the brief flinch across Gregory's face. No one spoke. Ethan stepped aside slightly. "Jasmine." Jasmine Lee pressed a button on the remote. The giant screen lit up. The video began to play. The moment Ethan was told to leave his first-class seat. Sarah's voice, faint but chillingly clear. Black guy thought he belonged in first class. Brad's reply, "I have never heard of his company. He is back where he belongs." Gregory's breathing quickened. Diane sat upright. Michael covered his face with a hand. Sarah's waist tightened her body, curling inward, as if trying to disappear. The video paused. Ethan walked to the center of the room. "If any of you still think this was a system error, watch this next part." Jasmine switched to the next slide. Internal emails appeared. Cold language, heartless words, racially biased instructions, written as if they were reasonable procedures. Ethan said nothing as the slides played. He did not need to. The truth itself was heavy enough to crush an entire corporation. Gregory spoke first, voice fragile like barefoot steps on broken glass. "Ethan, what you saw today, it is shameful," Ethan cut in. "Stop." He did not raise his voice. Yet Gregory fell silent instantly, as if the command came from someone holding the very life of his company. "We are past the stage of shame, Mr. Palmer. We are at the stage of consequences." Gregory inhaled shakily. "We want to make things right. We need your guidance." Ethan let out a soft, humorless laugh. Not mocking, not amused. The laugh of a man who had heard 100 insincere apologies in his lifetime. "I am not here to be North Star's spiritual advisor. I am here to force you to change." He placed a folder on the table before Gregory. "These are my terms. All of you have read them." Gregory opened the document, turning each page slowly. Every page hit like a blow. Immediate termination of Brad and Sarah. Termination of all managers who buried complaints. Creation of an independent chief diversity and inclusion officer. A complete overhaul of the seat assignment system. A public apology. Third-party monitoring for 24 months. Gregory breathed deeply. "We agree to all of it." Brad shot up from his chair. "What?" Gregory did not look at him. Sarah kept her head bowed, her hands trembling. Diane frowned. Gregory firing them immediately while Ethan interrupted. "No terminations, no agreement." Gregory looked at Ethan, the silence stretching tight as the final tension of a violin string before it snaps. "Fine." Sarah lifted her face. Tears spilled. Not loud sobbing, but the quiet kind of tears shed by someone seeing their own reflection clearly for the first time. "Mr. Carter, I know an apology isn't enough, but I became something I never wanted to be." Ethan looked at her. Not with pity, not with contempt, with the cold clarity of someone who had encountered people like her his entire life. "You have the right to change," he said, "but not while wearing the North Star uniform." Sarah nodded, tears falling. Brad clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. "You cannot do this." "I worked here 15 years, Ethan replied softly, his words sharp as steel. "You did wrong for 15 years. Gregory motioned for security. 2 staff members entered. "Mr. Wilson Gregory said you are terminated effective immediately." Brad shouted, but the sound died as the door shut behind him. Silence swallowed the room. Ethan remained standing, eyes locked on Gregory. "Now, Mr. Palmer, your final decision." Gregory lowered his head and signed the agreement. "North Star accepts all your terms. The camera zoomed in as the pen touched the paper. The soft scratch echoed unnaturally loud, as if the entire room, the entire city, the entire airline industry heard it. Gregory finished. Ethan did not smile, did not sigh. He simply nodded. Jasmine gathered the documents and handed them to legal counsel. Effective immediately, Ethan said. Gregory nodded. We will issue the public statement within 24 hours. Ethan fixed his gaze on him. No. Within 6 hours. Diane opened her mouth to protest. Gregory raised a hand to stop her. 6 hours. Understood. Ethan moved around the table and stopped right in front of Gregory. Only half a meter separated them. Two men, one who once believed he sat at the top of the world, and one who had been pushed out of a seat because of his skin color, now facing each other. Do you know why I am not suing North Star? Ethan asked. Gregory shook his head. It is not because I pity you. Not because I fear the legal process. Not because I want to be merciful. Ethan leaned in slightly, speaking low and razor clear. It is because I want you to live long enough to change. Gregory closed his eyes, as if hit by an invisible blow. Ethan stepped back. This meeting is adjourned. The camera widened, capturing the whole room like the final scene of a political thriller. The North Star team quietly gathered their papers. Sarah stood by the door, gripping a tissue. Gregory walked slowly, shoulders heavy. Ethan, meanwhile, strode into the hallway, hands in his pockets, moving with the confidence of a man who had just pulled a company back from the edge and set it on a new path. Jasmine hurried beside him. Ethan, we did it. He did not stop walking. No, he said. We just finished the easy part. Jasmine blinked. The easy part. Ethan glanced at her, a thin, sharp smile forming. The hard part begins when they actually have to change. The camera pulled back, zooming out slowly, as Ethan walked down the long hallway, overhead lights reflecting off his suit like streaks of light on a man stepping into the next chapter of his story. The screen faded to black. The next morning, Chicago was covered in a thin layer of mist, like the lingering breath of a long dream. But for North Star Airways, this was no dream. This was the day they would face the sky they themselves had darkened. The camera opened with a wide shot, the North Star headquarters, a small structure surrounded by forests of concrete. Sunlight pierced through the mist, as if even the sun wanted to witness what would happen next. Inside the airline's largest press hall, dozens of reporters packed the room. Tripods stretched upward, microphones pointed toward the stage, flashes flickered like restless lightning. None of them knew this morning would enter aviation history. Gregory Palmer stood behind the curtain. The man who once took pride in his position of power now clasped his hands together, trying to steady his breathing. Diane Schultz adjusted the mic on his collar. Gregory, one more time. Are you sure? Gregory looked at the mirror on the wall. It reflected a man stripped of arrogance, of coldness, a man forced to confront the darkest corners of the system he helped build. We have no choice, he said. 9 o'clock in the morning. The stage lights turned on. Gregory stepped out. No applause, no greetings. Only silence, the silence of predators before they strike their prey, or of people hoping to witness something extraordinary. Gregory placed his hands on the podium. One deep breath. 1 second to swallow the last remnants of ego. Then he spoke. North Star Airways was wrong. It struck the room like a bolt of lightning. Flashbulbs exploded. Fingers hammered keyboards. Gregory continued. We allowed a culture to exist where bias, prejudice, and discrimination became normal. He swallowed hard. We chose silence when we should have spoken. We chose avoidance when we should have confronted. And we chose to protect the wrong people. The room was perfectly still. No reporter interrupted. No one dared. Everyone could sense this was no longer a press conference, but a public confession. "We accept responsibility," Gregory said, voice lowered. "And we commit to completely reforming our system." He read the terms aloud. The immediate termination of all involved staff, including Brad and Sarah. The creation of a Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer position. A full overhaul of the seat assignment system. Mandatory company-wide training. Third-party monitoring for 2 years. A public apology to Ethan Carter. Ethan's name hung in the air. A name once mocked behind a cabin door, now making a massive corporation tremble. Gregory bowed his head and ended with, "We will change, not because we were forced to, but because we should have changed long ago." Cut to Ethan, watching the broadcast from his office. No one else was in the room. Sunlight cast a strong outline on his face, eyes deep and calm. No pride, no revenge, no satisfaction, just the quiet acknowledgement that he had done the right thing. The camera zoomed in slightly as Gregory issued the apology. Ethan closed his eyes for 1 second, letting go of a burden carried for a lifetime. A soft voice behind him asked, "Are you all right?" Taylor Brooks stood at the door with 2 cups of coffee. Ethan took one, inhaling its warmth. "I will be," he said. "This is just the beginning." Taylor looked at the screen, then at him. "You realize very few people could have done this, right?" Ethan looked back with a faint, bittersweet smile. "I do not want to be someone who could do it. I want to be someone who had to." Taylor nodded, saying nothing more. 1 week later, Apex Systems. A sunlit executive boardroom. Jonathan Miles, Apex's CEO, shook Ethan's hand. "I watched the entire situation unfold," Jonathan said. "How you handled it, that is leadership on another level." Ethan smiled. "Thank you. I only did what needed to be done." Jonathan sat. "And we want to resume the merger. At a higher valuation." Ethan raised a brow. How much higher? Jonathan slid a document toward him. 300 million. Ethan inhaled sharply. Jonathan continued. "Not because of finances, not because of technology, because of leadership culture. Someone like you we do not find even once every decade." Ethan gripped the edge of the file. "I agree." They shook hands. The camera zoomed in on their handshake, marking the start of a new era. 3 months later, North Star renamed its first-class cabin to Equity Class, fulfilling its promise. The airline became a case study in corporate reform, and Ethan was invited as the keynote speaker at the National Leadership Summit. A massive stage, bright white lights, more than 2,000 attendees waiting. Ethan stepped out not as a victim, not as a conqueror, but as a representative for everyone who had ever been pushed out of a seat they deserved. He began, "I was once asked to leave my first-class seat." The hall fell silent. But that was not the first time I was told I did not belong. It was simply the first time the world was forced to witness it with me. He scanned the crowd. Some eyes were misty. Some heads nodded slowly, recognizing that this story was not his alone. "We do not change a system by shouting at its doors," Ethan continued. "We change it by stepping inside and putting everything on the table." His voice deepened. "Justice is not about pulling someone down. Justice is about rebuilding how the world sees each other." Thunderous applause erupted. Not polite applause, but the kind that rises from hearts that have been overlooked. Ethan looked around, then concluded, "That day they took my seat, but they gave me something far greater an opportunity to make sure no one else has to stand when they have paid for the right to sit." The hall rose to its feet. Applause shook the air, long and powerful. Cut to the final scene. 3 more months passed. The camera opened on Ethan boarding a newly refurbished North Star aircraft. The airline had changed its branding, its service culture, its hiring principles. Not perfect, but different. A new flight attendant smiled warmly. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Carter. It is our pleasure to serve you today." Not a forced smile, not a rehearsed one. A real one. Ethan nodded and stepped into the cabin. The passenger beside him was a young woman, laptop open with lines of code on the screen. She looked up and recognized him. You are Ethan Carter, right?" Ethan nodded. "Your story helped me sue my old company for discrimination," she said. "I won, and I used the settlement to start my own company." Ethan smiled warmer than at any point in the story. "What does your company do?" She began explaining, eyes bright with hope. Ethan listened, focused, respectful, encouraging. The camera pulled back, revealing the airplane window, where the rising sun bathed the cabin in gold. The narrator's voice rose soft and full of meaning. Sometimes the smallest moment opens the largest door. Sometimes losing a seat gives you the sky. The plane took off, straight into the light. Fade out. From the perspective of a specialist in leadership and organizational culture, the journey of Ethan Carter reveals a timeless truth. Real power does not come from sitting in a first-class seat. It comes from what you choose to do when you are forced to stand up from it. In the corporate world where systems operate on habit bias and outdated interests, meaningful change rarely comes from those who benefit from the status quo. It comes from individuals who dare to confront injustice, who dare to question it, and most importantly, who dare to use their position to open doors for others. What Ethan did was not retaliation. It was reconstruction. It was not about bringing down an airline. It was about forcing an entire industry to look at itself. And that is the essence of modern leadership. Leadership is not about where you sit. It is about what you do with the voice you have. If this story resonates with you, if you believe that great change always begins with one person brave enough to stand up, leave a like to help spread this message and subscribe to follow the next inspiring journeys. Before you go, comment the phrase "Stand Strong" as a reminder that sometimes all it takes is one person standing firm to change the entire sky.